All right. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to have a very different webinar today. And I was telling Amy this morning as we were prepping that my goal actually is to not cry. So I actually might.
And
This is a really, really different book. And and we launched today. You launched today.
mhm.
So people can buy the book on Amazon and you'll see the reviews and things, including my own.
Oh, well,
And yeah,
thank you.
yeah. Well, I was really honored to be part of the pre-read group, so that was really wonderful. So Amy, let's go ahead and have you introduce yourself, and you've got a copy of the book. Mine's on the way, the actual copy. Yep. So just to disconnect to connect. And let's have you just give a quick introduction of yourself for those who I'm imagining that most people know you, but if they don't, knowing your like how well, you're not a professional author. You're actually a CPA and then other things as well. So
Yeah,
yeah. So the books are not the only thing that you do. So
yeah,
let me have you introduce yourself, and then we'll be off and running.
yeah. I am a CPA, and I no longer practice as a CPA, but I consult with the profession. I'm a keynote speaker at many accounting conferences and finance conferences around the country. So I've definitely had a career that's pivoted, all within the profession and in service to the profession. I do a lot of work with the AICPA and the Ohio Society. I'm on their board. And have always wanted to give back so much to the career that I have because I am a CPA. So my grandfather was a CPA, and my mom was not, but she grew up telling me I was going to be a CPA. So at 12 years old, I was pretty much saying I was going to be
You
a
kind of like took that.
CPA.
All right, I'm going to be a CPA. Yeah.
Not that I really knew what that meant. I kind of knew. And then, went into public accounting. And I think I met you, Allison. So I started my business when I was 27, believe it or not. So I went, I was an auditor, and did internal audit as well. And then I went and started my own practice and didn't want to do audit as my own practice because I was afraid of the liability.
The risk was too high. Yeah, you
Yeah.
mentioned that story in the book.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing was QuickBooks at the time was not, what it is today. And I was looking to see what, people did to advertise themselves for bookkeepers. And I saw the QuickBooks certified logo on some
The burger, the hamburger.
the
Yeah,
hamburger.
the hamburger.
And so I took the test, still had no idea what
What year
QuickBooks
was
was.
that? When were you certified? What year was that?
2001 or 2002. So
Yeah, early
early
days.
on.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
the content, Allison was not like doing the education into it yet. Like, so it was literally a certification and that was it, and go fly. And so I did that and started taking on clients and realized they wanted
Mhm.
consulting, as well as me having bookkeepers, but that was a surprise when I started this, and I just fell in love with it. And then I quickly started writing content for the Sleater
Yeah.
Group.
Yeah.
And I was speaking at one of those conferences, and that's when you actually
I
saw me
think
on stage.
I think it was Sleater Group. Yeah.
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 And I think it was in 2006, maybe. It was right
Yeah.
when you were starting the Intuit Trainer Writer Network. And then from there, you really kind of changed my life after that. You're like, you're gonna be a speaker. For me, you're gonna go out there, and I started writing the advanced certification that time. And yeah, that's really what put me on other stages, and then a trajectory. And I think a lot of people that get into speaking think this stuff happens overnight.
No.
Just shows the how long it takes to really
Yeah.
learn the system, learn how to speak, you know, in front of different audiences, different types of content. And I've evolved over time to what I do now, which is incorporating a lot of work life yoga philosophy into business and trying to make the workplace better for
Yeah.
accountants.
Yeah, you've had such an authentic journey. It's important that everybody, you know, on the webinar today and also hearing the recording later, um, there's a couple things that really stood out for me in what you just told. There are people along the way that are willing to help you, and I'm happy to be one of those people. I don't take any credit for it though. I think what I shared with you in the Facebook Live, the LinkedIn Live when you just did the book launch was that um, it's really interesting because when someone has the light and I call it the it that you have, it's really you have a path and you have that direction and you're going to be on it anyway. So those of you that are hearing this, if this is something that you want to do, you know, there are ways for you to do this, and you can do it too, and you start off in whatever avenue you 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 start off with, right? And then you also pivot and you make changes and you decide, oh, I like this, or no, I don't like that. I mean, early in my speaking career, I ended up having to speak to a group of auditors on Sarbanes-Oxley, and they completely shredded me. I was so above my, I was so like, you know, out of my depth. And I learned from that experience that I don't want to ever speak to auditors. Apologies to those folks out there. Um,
On
and the
technical subjects, at least.
Yeah, if you how to be a public speaker, I could talk to them about that, or
Yeah.
talk about QuickBooks or now Liscio, but I don't. Yeah, so I learned that. But the thing about it is taking those experiences and things, and this is where I want to shift it to the book. Um, there are experiences and people that come along in your life that have a really positive effect on you,
Mhm.
and then there are things that you internalize that actually weigh you down and kind of hold you back. So when you look at your journey, Amy, what was there any one point in time where you realized you really needed to look at generational trauma? Or like how did, I guess what I'm trying to peel the onion here is what was the actual aha moment? And maybe there wasn't one, but what was the actual aha moment that you had where you said, I really need to look into my family stories and understand what's going on so that I can heal myself. Now, you do
Mhm.
use the word epigenetics in your book,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I'm going to actually learn a lot more about that because that sounded like, oh, that sounds like something sciencey that I could kind of read
Yeah,
a lot about, right? But was
yeah,
there a moment in time where you just realized you needed to do this?
yes. And so um I would say, you know, for a lot of people that are career driven, type A, or go through trauma, you have a choice of, you know, dealing with it or just plowing through. And I chose to plow through. So,
That's what we
um,
do. The tough, when the going gets
yeah.
tough, the tough get going, and we keep going, don't we?
And
And how many type A people have we got on the call today? I don't know.
yeah.
I'm looking at a few names that I know that might be type
Yeah.
A, maybe.
Well,
Yeah.
and I would say too, it was a lifesaver for me that I was that too.
Mhm.
Like a lot of time, and I talk about in the book, like I don't know what gave me the strength to keep pushing. No one taught me that. Like I think there's certain
You
things
had to
that
do it. No, you
you're
had to
just
do it.
born with, you know?
But you had to do it. I mean, what
Yeah.
was your choice, right? You
Well,
had
but
to.
you know, my other family members made other choices, and I, you
Mm.
know, so everyone is born a different way of how they're going to deal with hard things. And I have always been really thankful that I was born this way to overcome, because I think when people go through hard stuff, you have a choice to do that or to kind of fall into bad things or to give up or to constantly blame circumstances in your life for why you do the way things you do. And
Mhm.
that started being a repetition of things that I would hear around me of like, well, I do this because of this person that did this to me. And as you get older, you know, and I don't know why I have maybe the perspective or, you know, something I was born with, but even when I remember, and I took this story out of the book, but I remember being 6 years old and standing at my brother's crib, and my parents said something to me about my brother. And I remember sitting back, like, I don't understand where that's coming from. And so that's a strange thing you're born with, because
Mhm.
you know, most people just believe whatever their parents say, or, you know,
I
and
think
so,
you called it in the book, you kind of called it your sixth sense. Like
yeah,
you had a little, those sort of little hairs that would stand up where you'd go,
yeah. But
mm,
you question, you know,
yeah.
and you don't question out loud, but sometimes when you're just trying to make it through and things get really hard, then
Mhm.
every morning, and I talked about that in the book, I would get up and say, I'm going to succeed. I'm going to get through this. No one's going to control me in the
Right,
future, you know? And
right.
so I did that. I plowed through. Um, and when I was 32 and I became a partner in a CPA firm, I had had my second child, and I did get sick from the pregnancy, but now looking back and learning more about postpartum, which I don't think people talked about as much at the time. I don't know if I had some of that as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah. It's a
but
lot more common and there's degrees of it too. You can have a little bit or a lot,
yeah.
right? Yeah,
And you don't really know that there's anything wrong, you
right.
know, and so, but it did all of a sudden have this perfect storm of, you know, I became partner and I wasn't as happy as I thought I was going to be about being partner, which is how I start the Business Balance Bliss book off.
Yeah.
And I started going to a therapist, but what I talked about in this book is going to a therapist, and my family was like for the week. If anything, people called it wimpy people went to therapists. And so for me, I remember the night before I went into the therapist's office, I had these bad dreams, and I, you know, got in there and my mom was sitting on the couch. Like I had this premonition, and I didn't even think I was going because of my parents. I just thought I didn't know what was
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
And so when I got there and we started breaking things down, I mean, it took years, but it was very intensive therapy. There was a moment, and I remember it so clearly, that I feel like this pane of glass just disappeared between me and my children. Like
Yeah.
even though they wouldn't have known it, they were young. I felt like I couldn't feel them and touch them in the way that I wanted to, because there was something holding me back. So truly, and I dedicate this book to my kids, if it weren't for being a mother, you
Yeah.
know, really made me relook at everything in my life.
That was actually what resonated most closely with me, like really at a very deep level, because my mother also made a choice, a similar choice that you made, that she was not going to have the same relationship with her kids that her mother had had with her kids, right?
Mhm.
With my mother and her siblings. And so I think everybody has that moment where something becomes so important that you need to, like you being a parent and parenting them authentically and not having that separation between them, which I think I might be paraphrasing here, might slightly get it wrong. If I do, correct me, but it was the need to keep your parents in the most important place.
Yes.
And then you were able to say, no, actually, I need to be, my kids are the most important.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so what needed to change there? So thank you for sharing that, because for those of you that are joining and haven't really understood what the book is about, um, I think the main thing for me that I took away is that you have these negative stories in your head. You called it the monkey mind, right? We all have them, right?
Mhm.
And why do you have them? Right. And so your book peels the onion about why do you have these stories? Why do you act this way? Why do you have the triggers that you have? Um, and then what can you do about it? And
Yeah.
I think that's for me just this incredibly hopeful thing. So let's turn a little bit to um, well, there's so many places that we could, but I think what I'd love to do is to bring to the connected leader. you
Mhm.
talk about being a connected leader. And can you tell us what you consider to be a connected leader? And then we can go into some of the benefits of that.
Yeah. So I think, for many of us that started in our generation in business, it was always told to us to keep this line, the separation between being a manager, supervisor, and your staff. And you should never get to know them too well
Don't
because
get
you
too
might have to
close. Yep,
fire them
yep,
one day.
yep.
And it was taught to you in management courses even. And I realized, once I started really uncovering myself, right? You have to do the work first.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, that once you start unraveling things and the messages in your head and what beliefs are really your beliefs, right? Like that's a great example is like you're carrying around this belief that you're not supposed to get close to your staff. Well, is that your belief or is that somebody else's belief that was told to you, but then you start carrying it without reason, right?
It feels like a very outdated old belief. It
Yeah.
feels like, I don't know, it feels like toxically masculine somehow to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't
Yeah.
feel like something that women would say to each other somehow. But
Yeah.
anyways,
Well,
I don't
and
know.
I do think it was such a different
But
time
we
frame.
did say,
Yeah,
and
because
women, female leaders did say that to us.
well, and to be a female leader, you only had you didn't have other women really to evaluate yourself against or to look to. I didn't have a lot of women that I knew that were leaders, and I wanted to be one day.
Well, and there was one that you talk about, and you've actually told this story to me several times, and I'm glad that it made it into the book, was there was that toxic partner who left and gave you a gift as she
Yeah.
was leaving. Tell
Yeah.
us about this little gift that she
Yeah.
gave you, which was,
Well,
and then also the story there that there was a lot more to it than you knew, but you carried that story.
yeah, well, and again, that goes into belief systems. Is I had when I worked in the Big Four, one of my first managers, and I think this is an important point that I make in the book, is we make a lot of assessments about people by looking at them.
Yeah.
And whatever we carry in ourselves, that's that unconscious bias toward anyone. Whatever it was about me, the minute she looked at me, she did not like me. And I knew it. Like you can, as an animal, feel it, when someone doesn't like
I
you.
think you triggered like jealousy because you reminded her of like somebody in her past that was,
Yeah,
you know,
you have no idea.
attractive and powerful, and and she was,
But I wasn't at the time. I was, an assistant accountant. I met her through college
you
recruiting.
triggered,
Yeah,
something
something.
in you triggered something
Yeah.
negative in her.
Yeah, she did
Yeah.
not, I knew she didn't want to hire me, but the partner there I had developed a relationship with. And so I knew I got hired because of him. But in a lot of cases at work, the person that you have the most conflict with, you end up working with the most. It just works out that way. And so,
It is
and that's
true.
part of,
This is so true. Yeah.
yeah. And so the way auditing goes, going back to auditing, is you get assigned to different jobs and have different managers on different jobs. Well, I happen to have her as a manager on every job my first year at this accounting firm. And I remember our first client I went on, and I had literally no idea what to do. It was GE, and it was a huge campus, and we park in the parking lot, and the senior on the job, she wasn't there yet. She was a senior manager, but the senior on the job said, don't take anything in from the car. We're just gonna go have this planning meeting. I didn't even know what a planning meeting was, and then we'll go from there. So I had no paper, I had no pen, I had no computer, nothing. Well, we didn't really have laptops, but whatever at the time. So we get in this big conference room, and then this manager comes in right at the time of the meeting. And so we're in with like the controllers and the CFOs of GE. I am so like, oh my God, what's going on here? And then the meeting's starting, she's talking, and then she stops the meeting. This is my first job as an accountant. And she stops the meeting and turns to me and says, "Why are you not taking notes?" But I didn't have anything with me because I was told not to bring it in. And she took the seniors' paper and pen and scooted it over in front of me. And she said, "You take," but I didn't even know what notes to take. Like, I literally had no idea what I was doing. I was so humiliated. So that's how my year
Mortified.
was.
Yeah.
And so when we get to the end of the busy season, she's leaving. And at the time in Big Four, they would have these parties when managers and people would leave. So I decided to go, because she had been my manager, and I was like, I'll leave when this is over. And I went in to the party. They gave her goodbye gift, and I went up to her and I said, "Thank you for the opportunity to work here," and so forth. And she said, "We need to talk." And I said, "Okay." And she took me outside this conference room that's all glass. So everyone sees she's walking in a hallway with me, and we're outside in this hallway that everyone can see. And she said to me, "Successful women don't look like you. You look like a ditz. You're actually smart, but you don't look it." And then went on to berate me and made me feel like everyone thought that way. And I went in my car and I cried and thought I never was going to have a
And you
career.
were really young, like you were just in
I
your
was
early,
22.
yeah, you were in your early 20s. Yeah.
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 And that's the thing. Like, who knows if she was actually trying to help me? I have no idea, but those words matter,
Mhm.
as a leader, and how we talk to people,
That's right.
and how hard people are trying, and everyone's trying to do their best. And then it's trying to figure out how to communicate in the right way. I mean, that feedback's unnecessary, but
The,
when we're giving feedback,
yeah, well, the interesting thing is,
speaking in the right way.
as you were telling this story in the book, I was thinking, I wonder what her backstory was.
Mhm.
Because knowing her backstory might have been like, I'm guessing that she just was a really kind of an outcast kind of person and really just couldn't connect with people. That's what I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And understanding her backstory, the reason I want to bring this up is that we've all had these people in our lives that really quite in a toxic way affected us. So there's two things I took away from this story, Amy, is that um, one is that you made that choice to not take it on. Like, it took you a while, you had to shed it, you had to work through it, you had to kind of, for one of a better word, step into your own power. And it took you a while to do that. Especially when you got validation later on in you also tell the story in the book about you got validation that no, nobody sees you that way. That person is, don't listen to her, right? Kind of consider the source, right? But so that was the one thing, consider the source. However, the second thing I thought, how different would the story have been if you knew her backstory? Like, if you
Which
knew
is
that,
fine.
well,
Either.
she
Yeah.
wouldn't share it because that
Yeah.
wasn't her value system, or she
Right.
didn't know how.
Exactly.
But the interesting thing is, if you knew her backstory, you might have been able to say, I thank you for your feedback. And maybe there was one thing in there that that might have been valid that you could look at, right?
Yeah.
That might have made you more effective, right?
Well, and I think, what I talk about in the book is to be careful of what feedback you listen to, because you don't
That's
know
right.
the perspective of that
That's right.
someone's coming at you at, whether it be jealousy or that they're trying to help you or whatever
Right.
belief systems that have been put into them that maybe they haven't realized they believe or not believe as well. Like, you don't really know why someone is doing what they're doing. So then you have to take feedback and then decide what
Hmm.
is relevant and what is not relevant, and what do you do to adjust? Because there are things I did to adjust still because I wasn't sure. And take it in and make it make sense in your life, but also not take it in like, because the reason I talk about that story as a leader is I think so many people have stories when they were younger of teachers saying something to
Yeah.
them, or a parent, or telling someone that they just will never be successful. And again, you have to have the wherewithal to believe that you will be successful, and
Mhm.
that isn't what is and isn't true. And how much negative self-talk are you going to take into your own body and mind, and then self-sabotage too. So you
Right.
really have to decide how you want to move forward in your own journey, and what serves you and what doesn't.
Yeah, you talk about, there's a point in your book where you talk about and you're actually talking about happiness, but I think at this point you could interchangeably use the word success as well. Um, you said, rather than sort of expecting it to occur sort of automatically, or someone to deliver it to you, like I'll be happy if,
Mhm.
um, and it's always like some external thing. Um, you need to work to sort of regulate yourself, like, and then like ensure that you're creating that joy, and the setting it up properly for your optimum. And I
Mhm.
think that's one of the things for me, that this book gives a really good roadmap to do that. And one of the things you really talk about is the backstories, but like of other people's backstories, but also your own. And what are you bringing forward? And one of the things I was thinking as you were talking about your own generational traumas, and the story of your, your grandmother getting dropped off at the orphanage, because of the depression, right? And
Mhm.
and the story
How
that
that
was,
story got manipulated.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, and the other side of the story. And that was the
Mhm.
thing that was really interesting to me, was I was thinking there's like a couple of sides to the story, right?
Mhm. Yep.
And, my parents were war babies. So they were raised in the UK at a time when things were, they literally were bombed. Like they were literally living in London and bombed. I mean, you had to, my father's mother, my grandmother, I never met her because she died when he was 5 in a bombing. She was hit by shrapnel. And so that was the story. It was interesting because you said there was a story of your mom's where she got off the hook for everything.
Mhm.
My family story is my dad's mother died when he was 5. So
Mhm.
he is now deceased, but he, throughout his whole life, he got off the hook because, well, his mom died when he was 5. And I think, okay, Dad, you died, you were nearly 80. It's 75 years, right? Like, how much longer are you going to get off the hook for that? So that's the other thing, I think, is that you can, once you understand these things, you can say, well, that happened in some of these cases, some of these things happened almost 100 years ago.
Right.
Like the Depression was almost 100 years ago. And so your family was carrying around, and you were carrying around this trauma that happened 100 years ago.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So I hope people on the call, or on the webinar, and as listening to this, are thinking it's time to sort of like you take back your power, right? And you, in fact, it might not even be taking it back. It might be taking it for the first time,
First time.
right?
Yeah.
So I thought that
Well,
was really
and I think,
interesting.
yeah, I mean, so that was an awareness thing of that every time bad behavior would happen in my family, the apology was, but you don't understand what happened to me.
Right.
And
I am this way because something happened to me.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I remember like once I became a teenager thinking, well, when do you take responsibility for like
For
how
healing.
long?
Like
Yeah,
it wasn't her fault that what happened to her. That was
no,
horrible.
right. But when do you take responsibility for your own actions?
Yeah.
You can't, blame that forever. It is not their fault today that you did this today.
Yeah.
So, so our job, especially when we are taking care of others and even for ourselves to find that happiness, I believe, this is my belief, is to, not only recognize it, but it's like exercise. You have to action it. Like,
Yeah.
so you can know it, right? And I
But
think
then it has to hit your gut. Like
yeah,
it can
like
hit your head.
but
Yeah.
one of my parents, I think, knows it, but they don't do the action to change it.
Yeah.
And so the the problem is when you don't do the work, and the work is the hardest part
It is
because
scary. It's really
hard
scary, and it lays you bare, doesn't it? Because you really have to grapple with their real feelings,
and you
right?
don't know when it's over.
No.
Like I remember when I went through it, because I just ended up like, I will not bring this into another generation. When I realized
Mhm.
how many generations it had gone through,
Yeah.
you look back at it, um, I was when I was in it, I remember saying to my therapist, like, when is this over? Like, when do I get through it? And he's like, you gotta be in it. You gotta,
Mm.
just work through it. And luckily I had the tools with yoga and other things, that I was doing outside of therapy to other healing, whatever you find that gives you healing or release. But though that's the hardest part, is creating
Yeah.
the habit and creating the new belief system.
Yeah, and knowing where you can find when you were talking with Ian on the prior one was how you said, well, just, being a yogi, everybody assumes that you can meditate. And you're like, well, I really actually really struggle with meditating. So, I meditate and move, right? I was thinking the only place I can really get still is in the forest.
Mm.
And so for me, like it's that hiking, but there has to be like this hike and then the wind and the birds and then
Mhm.
it's like, okay, all right, I can get still. So
But
I
it's
just want to read.
identifying that, which is
Yeah, yeah. So everybody should know, folks on the call, I want you to make sure that you write down an assignment, if you will, is to make sure that you understand where you can feel still. And if you
Mhm.
don't have a place to feel still or whatever, well, you're all going to read the book, I know. Then, but I want to read out some of the chats because I think they're starting to be quite important. So Vicky chats in that her grandmother was a depression baby and died at 100 and a half last year, and she witnessed hoarding all her life. So that hoarding is a normal response to having nothing,
Mhm.
right? And needing to cover yourself and. So Vicky, I hope you're doing the healing on that because hoarding can negatively affect families for
Well, and I remember
what do
saying,
you do with all the stuff? Yeah.
yeah, well, I remember saying to my son, um, when we were going through COVID, that my grandfather would keep money in coffee cans because they had gone through the Great Depression, right? And
Hmm.
so like COVID was going to be one of those things where they grew up putting all this hand gel on and everyone was okay
Yeah.
fast, like, but other generations beyond them will be like, why do they do that? It's
Why does grandma wear a mask at all our parties?
yeah.
Yeah, I feel a little bit like that because I think I'm the only one of the only people really that wears masks anymore at like trade shows and things. And I need to get over that fear, right, of getting COVID again because I did and it kicked my ass. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to swear everybody. Um, Liz says my dad's parents were overbearing and controlling. My parents compensated by going too far the other way.
Mhm.
Yep.
Mhm.
Um, and there's Bonnie hiking, and then also that hoarding. Her grandmother was a food hoarder. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. There's really interesting things that you look at if you understand why. And if one little piece of advice, I'm sorry, I shouldn't probably be giving advice, but if you have a difficult relationship with someone or you don't understand, you can actually ask them why. So Amy, one of the activities that we used to do at Intuit when we worked there, because there was a brief period of time where you worked at it, well, it wasn't brief,
Mhm.
but a period of time where you
Yeah.
worked actually at Intuit. Um, we did the journey lines. Do you remember that? That
Mhm.
activity where and this is something you can do with your team is that everybody and you share what you want to share, right? So it's one of these things where it's safe because people share what they want to share. But I remember hearing a particularly raw one from a teammate who I had some struggles with. I really had. I didn't understand this person. I didn't know how to work with them. I felt like we were always like, I was here and they were there, and I just felt it was a mess, and I just wanted to avoid them. And then I got to hear their journey line. And I'm deliberately keeping this gender neutral because I don't want anybody to. And this person was in the car when their parents were killed.
I know that story. Yeah. Awful.
You do, you know who I'm talking about. And immediately that I understood that, I immediately saw their behavior in a completely different, and all of a sudden I was like, wow, you go, because you look what you've overcome.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
So
and that level of understanding, I'm glad you brought Intuit up, because I think out of all the places I worked at, that was the best training of listening. At that company. I mean, even though there's always struggles at a corporation.
nobody's perfect. Yeah.
But leaving there was hard because I knew probably there wasn't a safer corporate environment than that one
Yeah.
at that time,
Yeah.
because of their focus on what I heard you say was in every conversation, so that you could reiterate back and truly, someone could correct you and say, no, that's not what I meant to say. What I was trying to get across was this. But so many times, and I talk about this in the book, we leave conversation, and I talk about perception versus reality. That two people leave a conversation with two different realities, but it's what is the right reality? What is the truth? And if we don't learn how to actively listen and be open to listen to what, not just the words, but the body language and other nuances that are going to give you information, then it's very hard to push past any initiatives you're trying to do at work or at home or personally, if you're not paying attention.
Yeah, and in a remote environment, what advice would you give to folks out there that are managing teams in remote environments? Because
So
the body
I
language is
yeah,
much
I
harder.
mean, for me, our team always has the webcams on. I have a thing about webcams because eyeballs are connection. I mean, so when we're looking at each other, when we can see body language, it's really important. When the cameras are off, you don't know what people are doing. You don't know if they're really paying attention. It doesn't feel good. You still need that connection, but it's also important that you have meetings where you're still starting or ending with looking to learn personally about each other too.
Yeah.
It's not just all business, because I think when we're in a remote environment, it's easy to be like, we're talking about this, blah, 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 off, instead of, when we were in an office together, when we actually had the time to kind of, not that there was really more time, but we stopped at each other's desks, we talked to each other, we go to lunch together.
Yeah, there were little times when it could even be just in the restroom and talked, hey, how was your weekend?
Yeah.
Or are you okay? You look a little down today.
Yeah. Where we go and look at what were the best things in an environment where we were in the workplace, like what things we miss, and then try to think about how you can be creative of putting it in the remote work environment as well.
Right. So I want to talk about, because we're talking about teams now and managing teams. You mentioned at a certain point that you've tried to set it up so that your team can actually go fish instead of, and I know that various books that I've read, and yours just is another additional, although yours goes a lot deeper into the personal stuff, and it really resonated with me on that major level. But if you think about Liz Wiseman's book, Multipliers, right? I don't know if you've read that. It's a good one. Good one to read. Yeah. And Radical Candor. Those are the two I think that for me were really, no one wants to work for the smartest person in the room. Right. And you mentioned with Ian that as you get, and you actually say this in the book, that as you get more senior, you want to kind of, everybody's natural tendency is to tell people how things should be done. And then what happens is that really creativity and innovation gets stifled, and people wait for you. You actually accidentally diminish. That's the concept in Multipliers. You actually become an accidental diminisher by being the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you go back to to Intuit, the best leaders were the people that they just asked questions.
Mhm.
They never gave any answers. They just asked the questions, right? So can you tell us about your concept about allowing your team to go fish and how someone would what that would look like if you were working with a team of people?
Yeah, well, when and I think when this really started was when I had my own accounting practice, and you have so many deadlines, you're so busy. And I see this now consulting with firms, that what happens is so many leaders don't delegate when they should, because they're like, I'll just do it. It'll get done faster. I don't have
I
time
think
to
it's
explain it.
it's a
Yeah.
chronic problem, isn't it?
It's a
Do it faster to do it
problem.
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we think no one else can do it as well. And one of the things that I started seeing was like my staff would come ask me how to do something,
Yeah.
and I would say to them, I want you to go try it, and then we'll talk about it. But I wanted to see what their thought process was to get to the end answer. And sometimes I would learn something different.
They did a better job. Like you said
Yeah.
it sometimes I think this is your exact words. I've discovered that they can sometimes arrive at an even better idea or
Yeah.
find a better path.
Yeah. And so even though that takes a little more time, but not, if you look at return on investment over time, it doesn't, so if
Right.
you're constantly going to be redoing it, you're going to work yourself crazy and get burned out.
You also bottleneck. You also constrain the capacity of the team by not allowing the team to grow and right?
Yes, absolutely. So, and now like my business today, when it's all an idea and a thought and, my purpose of what I want to put out in the world, but all the people that work with me are now like, it's like a quilt, everyone starts
Yeah.
adding to it, and then it starts becoming better than if it was just me. And so it's really important that you and I talk about in the book, when you hire people, you're not hiring yourself.
No, you shouldn't actually hire
And
yourself. You
so
actually should. I think you should hire people smarter than yourself.
right. Well, or opposite, not even necessarily
Or yeah,
not
adjacent.
smarter.
Yeah.
It's like, it's being really honest about what my weaknesses are, and being very clear about what my weaknesses are. And I need someone to fill that weakness, because not only is it a weakness, it's not something I really want to get better at, because I don't really enjoy that part of the work. And someone
Yeah,
else,
for me, it's creating processes. I'm like
yeah,
all ideas and people.
yeah,
And then I'm like, okay, well, this is the idea. These are the people. And okay, now someone else figure out the process.
right. Exactly. I'm a lot like that.
I could do it, but
I
it was
do
really
like structure. And
oh,
so, but I need someone to really take that idea and then put the structure around it.
yeah, we used to call
But they
those people.
believe in the idea. They have to
Yeah.
believe in it as well and be just as passionate, but then take their skill set and talent and use it to the best of their ability, without me trying to get in the way of that,
I always figure I can I can like get the plane in the air and I need someone else to land it.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Like someone has to fly it and land it. I
Yeah.
can get it going, right?
Yeah.
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 And
So
everyone enjoys
understanding that.
different things,
Yeah, and you actually do bring when you have a rounded team where everybody's bringing different skills, the heights that you can go to as a team is really, yeah. So you really don't want everybody to be the same. Let's shift to the topic of social media. And you have a couple of really great, insights there about what we choose to show on social media and how we view, you know, how we view others. Can
Mhm.
you explain sort of how where you think social media fits into this in either a positive or a negative way?
Well, I think social media can be a positive thing when used, how do you put it, ethically, morally, with the energy that you want to put into the world,
Hmm.
um, as well. But also how it can be misconstrued
Hmm.
is and that's what I, write in the book, and why I'm doing this book. When we talk about how long ago this was, my therapist at the time was like, no one would know this about you.
No,
And
they
people
really
need
wouldn't.
to know these stories so that they can see that they
Yeah.
can heal too, they can move through this. And so it's taken this long to put this together, have the courage to even put it out there. But that's not stuff you put on social media, like you're not gonna, so you have this impression of a person
Yeah.
you see and think, oh, everything's come easy to them, or, it's just something you think, and you don't all the time realize you're making that assumption, right? Like everyone just immediately makes an assumption about others based on however they see them, their interactions, whatever it is. But we don't often step back and pause and really assess whether that assumption is right or wrong. And that's really mindfulness practice, is going into or observing someone and just accepting them as they are in that moment without having those preconceived notions or those stories or whatever, issues we might think we have with the person or whatever, or unconscious bias, all of those things, right? And so I think that's where social media sometimes goes wrong, because you're I'm gonna
You're
post
not getting the full
my
picture.
happiest moments on there. I'm not gonna post my bad days, and I don't want to create that energy with people either. Like my purpose is to lift people up, but doesn't mean, we're all not going through hard stuff. And so I use that as an example in the book of really being more understanding of the people around you during your day, because most of our day is with our coworkers.
Yeah.
And we often just see them as we see them at work, but not necessarily understanding like the demands that they've got going on in their life, or what's stressing them out, or what's maybe we're seeing a reaction at work that's actually something deeper than that, but we're not asking the question to truly understand what's going on.
Or we haven't created an environment, or we haven't created an environment where people feel,
Safe.
like they would be safe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In Radical Candor, there's a section on kind of like what your job is as a leader, right? And it is to create that safe space and manage people's but again, like help them understand their blind spots, but give that honest feedback, but do it with empathy and compassion. Yeah. And so speaking of feedback, so we got about 12 minutes left on the webinar today. I think a lot of us overachiever type A type people, which I'm sure many of us are on this webinar, myself included. I think you also, from what you've described as your past. We tend to focus on, we might get a fantastic, let's say it's an annual review or a quarterly review or whatever, or we finished a project and somebody gives us feedback, and most of it's positive. We tend to focus on that one negative thing.
Mm-hmm.
What do you recommend people do with that? And how do you change that type of reaction to, a more positive outcome?
So I think it's recognizing it first. And that's what I talk about in the book, right? Like I can get 99% great comments, and I'm
that
looking
one thing. and you hear it in your head for like years, don't you? We need to stop the madness on that one, folks.
So I think it's more that awareness of how we have to be aware and observe that it's happening. Mm-hmm. And take accountability for it happening, right? And then
you go, oh, there I go again.
Yeah. I need to let that go. The other thing is that a gratitude practice, I think, is really, really important, because that helps us to focus on the positive things that we're seeing and being grateful for, the positive encouragement we're getting, and so forth, and not so much on the negative, because our brains are actually organized to focus on the negative. Like,
Yeah, it's our lizard brain, right? It's like from when we could be food, right?
Mhm.
Like no, it goes back to when we could have been somebody's food,
Mhm.
right? Or not somebody, but some thing's food, right? Some
Yeah,
animal or something could get us and we would be food. So those negative things was actually a survival thing. But
yeah.
now they've become, we don't live in a world where we risk being eaten. I mean, most of us don't, right?
Exactly.
Right.
But I think that's the point of getting still and observing, however you
Mhm.
choose to do it, whether that be in the forest hiking, or sitting still on a meditation cushion, listening to music,
With your
whatever.
pillow and your blanket in your bedroom,
Yeah,
you describe that like, oh, I see it automatically and I do it. Yeah.
yeah. But that observation of those thoughts, and I think that was one of my hardest lessons in yoga, was the non-judgment. And we don't realize how much we judge our thoughts or judge
Yeah.
what we're doing, and then we think other people are judging us, when really other people are
Yeah.
just in their heads and
They're living their
really
lives.
caring about like what's going on. Like, we're thinking we've got way more going on, and it's so much, everyone can hear what's happening inside of us, but they really can't, and so it's like, it's important that we do observe what's going on, and then go to our toolbox
Mhm.
and say, what can we do to offset that? And offsetting that means that I've got to be intentional about my thoughts and what serves me. And if this thought
Yeah.
does not serve me,
Yeah.
then I need to let it go. And, I was listening to a radio show, and someone was calling in about road rage. Uh, and I thought it was interesting because the caller basically said they were talking about this car that cut them off. And then they saw the car again 3 months later and got mad all over again. And the disc jockey said to him, were you actually thinking about this for 3 months? And he said, basically, yes. And we don't realize like how long
Yeah.
we hold on to certain,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that was a moment in time, and even that, we're trying to keep ourselves safe on the road, but it's also like, I don't need to race this person, just let them be in their world, and I'm going to keep myself safe, and not let that
Yeah.
take our headspace. But this is the journey. The journey isn't like, this book isn't saying, I am perfectly healed, and this is a journey of awareness.
Yeah.
There are always times of healing, and there are always times where life comes at you and there's things that you don't expect.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing that you can learn is awareness of yourself and when that's happening, and what you need to do to offset that, so that you can show up better for yourself, but better for the people around you as well. And not being like, well, I'm acting this way because of, blah, blah, blah. Instead of being like,
Or
I'm
things are happening to
recognizing
me
it.
and it's not my fault, right? Like
Yeah.
the victim thing, I think you make this to me it came through very, very clear that you don't need to be a victim and of your prior your family generational history or your own history you just don't have to be a victim to that. You can literally things that you can do. So it was incredibly empowering to me to read this book. And the journey, it just reminds me there's a number of things that I love. That there was at one point where you said there was I think it was a meditational exercise that one of your teachers had helped you with, where imagine that you're walking along and every day you fall into the same hole and you can't get out. You get in the hole and you can't get out. And there's no one to help you and you're in the hole, right? And to me it was like, oh my God, I'm in a hole, right? Well, then you said okay, you just every day and oh, there's a hole.
I'm not gonna walk
I
in.
might still fall in. Oh, I fell in. Oh, okay, I fell in the hole. But then finally you get to the point of, oh, there's a hole there. Maybe I'm going to go a different path, or maybe I'm going to stop and I'm going to look in the hole and then not fall in, or maybe I'm going to walk around the hole. And to me, to my mind is like, I'm going to build a bridge and go over the hole, right? I always like have a have
Yeah.
like a solution where, you
Yeah.
know, but knowing that hole is there, I think. And so what are the holes that we're being dragged into, or that we're allowing ourselves to fall into? And that's the thing, is that we're allowing this to happen to ourselves. We just don't realize that we are,
Yeah.
right? And that's the power of it, isn't it? Um, and I think the epigenetics is something I really want to look into. That's something you mention in the book. And so there's something there that I want to kind of, I think there's just so much promise for helping like large groups of people to sort of step up and have better lives. So there's a number of things that you've brought to my personal awareness that I'm very, very grateful for.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for supporting the book, and all of you that are on as well and been commenting throughout. I mean, this is what this is about, is to have these more authentic, genuine conversations, and to share that, get to know each other in that way. But
Yeah.
not to get lost in anyone's story, is to, use that as a marker that we're all human, and we all have the ability to keep working on ourselves and be
Yeah.
inspired by one another to do that.
Yeah. And how different would our days be if everyone understood that everyone else was doing the best they could,
Yes, that's all
right?
you.
I mean, it would be incredibly transformational if we all approached each other with that idea that we all have pain, we all have issues, we all have challenges and struggles, and we're doing the best we can,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
So we have a few minutes left. If there are any burning questions from anyone, or comments that you'd like to make, I really appreciate all of you for being on this, and I think that this has just been a really wonderful, wonderful discussion. How can people get the book, Amy?
Yeah, so Amazon has the book, and a bunch of retailers. So if you go to amyvetter.com
Mhm.
/disconnect to connect, or to the book section, you'll see Disconnect to Connect. We list all the retailers that have it. You can get it on
Yep.
the Kindle edition as well. The audiobook will be out in probably a month or so. So
Yeah.
it's recorded, and it will be a workshop.
Well,
which-
that's what Liz is saying. This book needs to be a workshop. So what are the plans for a workshop?
Yeah, so I have the B3 Method Institute is our
Mhm.
educational program, and we offer mindfulness courses there, and also courses for accountants building a CAS practice and technology
Yeah.
and all that stuff. Our goal is to help people achieve work-life harmony. I have a number of keynotes that are tied into this, and yeah, there'll be lots of more educational content coming out with it.
Yeah, this book was definitely more personally, it was just more personal, wasn't it? The rest of Amy's books are more, business focused, and I don't want to say the word practical, because this was a very practical book too. I think this is an incredibly practical book. Um, However, I think this is a nice add-on to the rest of the things that you're teaching. And honestly, Amy, I just feel so privileged to have known you, to know you, and to be in your life. So
So am I. Thank you.
I
I
did
really
say I wasn't going to cry.
it means so much to me, and what a support you've been to me in my career as well. So you have laid good seeds all over the profession, Allison.
Well, thank you. And you also, yes. And then is the name of the book Create Work-Life Harmony? No, it is Disconnect to Connect. Thank you. Thank you, Miriam. There we go. With the beach in the background. Yeah. If you go to just amyvetter.com, you'll be able to find all of the resources there. And we've also shared the Amazon link there. Thank you, Bonnie. All right, everybody. I want to thank Amy. I want to thank Bonnie. Thank all of you for attending. This was amazing. And I did get through it with just a tiny little tears at the end, but That's,
Thank you so much
that's,
for having me.
yeah, I really appreciate you, Amy. All right, everyone, have a wonderful day. And I hope that you get as much out of this book as I did. So, all right. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.